We can't hear you.
How's that? Hear me now? Thank you.
That's better.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. I could have gone on for a long time. Um, so just want to let you know, last week we had an interesting firmware issue and I wasn't able to do the BDD with robots. Okay, you can't hear me. I think everybody else can hear me. You may want to check if you still can't hear me, check your volume. Um, Chime when people join the line. I didn't think it chimes when it does that. Can people hear me now? Is everybody good?
Yes.
I think we still got it. Okay, great. Okay, so last week we unsuccessfully tried to do the demo of the behavioral development with robots and discovered there was a new firmware update that came out and I couldn't get it to work in time for it. But I've done more testing now and we should be good for doing that next Tuesday. But we're going to be talking about effective remote presentations from boredom to engagement. So hopefully that's what you all are here for today. So I want to ask a question. How often do you give some type of presentation, whether it's remote or in person? And keep this box up there as you go, because we'll be using it. I'm going to... Okay. How often do you give some type of... So multiple times a month is in top place now. And do go ahead and bring that link up because we're going to be using this for a lot of stuff kind of as we go. And I've got questions I want to ask because I'm very curious what the average most popular thing is in a few of these. Okay, so it looks like most of us are doing things weekly or monthly, sometime there. Most of us are, which makes sense. This is why you come to hear about giving remote presentations. Oops, did I go the wrong way? Yes, I did. Okay, so which do you prefer? Do you prefer to present in person, prefer to present remotely, or prefer not to present anything? What's your preference? Remotely? So that's interesting. It looks like over half of us would prefer to present remotely, which is interesting. There's a lot of advantages of doing things remote. There's also a lot of things that we miss when doing stuff remote. But I think this is very interesting. Of course, this may be something of selection bias, right? If you're coming to something on how to give remote presentations, you may really like doing remote presentations. But it does beat spending lots of times in airports to try to get somewhere. So remote is your option. Yes. Oh yes, speaking to the void. That's always exciting. And one way I know people are alive is by putting these polls in here. I know people are actually paying attention, which is nice feedback. So that's one thing we'll talk about here in just a minute. Okay, so what does this have to do with agility? I would like to suggest that a large portion of what makes agile work, or on successful teams I've been on that have delivered working software efficiently, one of the key things that made that happen is good communication. So, and even if you're not working on an agile project, poor communication is a really, really good way to wreck just about anything, right? So, so anything we can do to kind of up our ability to communicate well is probably going to be worth the effort. Now, that said, everything in this talk has plenty of rooms for improvements. Starting with the idea of being off mute when I start the talk. So there's things, hopefully there's some takeaways from here that will be useful to you, but you'll probably also have lots of ideas of how it could be made better. And at the end of the talk, there's a place for you to give me that feedback too. Okay, so we're going to start out with looking at 4 different talk problems. So things you may have experienced or seen in talks and talk about some solutions for them. And I just want to mention these 2 books I thought were very, very useful to me. The HBR Guide to Persuasive Presentations. It's really expensive if you get it new, I think, but if you pick it up from Better World Books or Thrift Books or someplace like that, you can get it for, I think, even under $10. It's a very nice just look at what it takes to make presentations persuasive and a lot of aspects of that. Highly recommend that. This other book is about from the person, the head of TED. So he talks about a lot of the things they've tried, things that have worked well, and some things that haven't worked so well in giving TED Talks. So it's a fairly easy read. I really enjoyed it, so that's another book I'd recommend if you're looking for ways to kind of up your presentation game. Okay, problems. So remember, we're going to look at 4 problems related to talk. So a talk doesn't feel fulfilling. This can be because, like you said, somebody mentioned not getting feedback. That can be very unfulfilling for the presenter. But also, there's some talks where it's just like you listen to the talk. There was a lot of information. It wasn't even boring, but it just didn't feel very fulfilling. So here's a question for you. Why does George have this golf ball? This does relate to the talk. There's a thing here, but why does he have this golf ball? So choose your answer. Is it because he's been pretending to be a marine biologist? Because he recovered it for Kramer? He's just lost the girl of his dreams? Or he's linking the end to the beginning? What do you think? A title. Okay, so why does George have the golf ball? If you did not watch Seinfeld, that's okay. It will make sense in just a minute. I'll give you just enough to know how it relates to the talk. So all of the above is probably pretty accurate. Let's see, how do I... Oh, this is one thing with Slido that I haven't figured out yet. Okay, well, there is an answer there somewhere. Do I have to click on it? Do I get to show the results? Okay, there we go. Okay, he's linking the end to the beginning. So in this Seinfeld episode, it starts out, Kramer, I think, has gotten a bunch of golf balls for some reason, and he's going out to the ocean, and he's just knocking them off into the ocean. So you hear that at the beginning, and it's just kind of in passing, right? It's just something that happens at the very beginning of things. Well, at the very end, it turns out this whale washes ashore, and George saves the day by grabbing this golf ball out of the whale's blowhole, because that's why it's having trouble, and he saves the whale. He's been claiming to be a marine biologist, and at that moment he decides to tell the girl of his dreams that he's not actually a marine biologist when he's actually saved the whale. Anyway, the point of this, though, is this seemingly insignificant thing that happens at the beginning of the sitcom shows up at the very end again in a way that ties it all together. And I find Seinfeld episodes are often very fulfilling to watch because it does stuff like this. It takes something that happens at the very beginning that seems insignificant or that you haven't really understood how important it is, and then at the end it ties it back to it. So this is a way in talks to make things effective. If you have a way of tying your talk to where when you get to the end of the talk, you're bringing things back to help people understand what happened at the beginning. Yes, a lot of stand-up comics do the same thing. And it's a very good way to make sure that you're showing that, hey, all this stuff was important or had meaning in some way. And in talks, that's a very effective thing to do as well. If you think about this is kind of how we're taught to write our paragraphs, right? You know, we have a topic sentence and then a clincher sentence that refers back to the topic sentence. We also do it in music, right? A very common form of music is to have an exposition of something. We've got A, and then we do something different, and then we come back and refer to A again in some way. So that's a very common theme that we have many different in many different areas. In one of my talks, if you've heard my talk on courageous software delivery, I tried to do that. I start out by talking about some things with Captain Kirk and give this example of Captain Kirk talking to Scotty. And then when we get to the very end of it, I talk about how having courage in software development is what it's going to really take to get to the stars, you know, and these things we dream of in Star Trek. And it may not be a strong tie-in, but you're at least not left with this thing just being random, right? It ties it back in. And that's a very good way. These types of things, when you can incorporate them into your talks, are a very good way to make sure that you're tying everything together. You think I'm going to close the presentation with the golf ball? Well, like I said, this talk has plenty of room for improvements, and that probably is a good way to do it. We'll see. Problem: people are tuning out or losing focus. So let's try an experiment here, okay? Let's say I want to talk to you about boredom. That seems like a good thing to try to talk about. Talking about boredom. So here is, let's say I put this slide up there, and I'm going to talk about boredom. And here's lots of really, really good information about boredom. Very, very detailed. There's even references to other things that don't even fit on the screen. Lots of great information about boredom. So imagine this is a page of text about your viewers being bored, okay? Or I can put this up on the screen, right? I've got this up on the screen, and it's just the word boredom, okay? Now, these will have different, you'll have different reactions to this. Or a third one I could put on the screen is this. I'm going to talk about boredom. I don't even have any words on the screen. I just do this. So question for you, which would keep your attention? Of these things, which would keep your attention? The multiple paragraphs about boredom, a single word boredom, or the fox yawning? Now we got some people that are like, I would prefer to read every single piece of that text, which probably says more about me as a presenter of, I'd rather read all that stuff and listen to what Mark has to say about boredom. And some of us are saying the single word boredom is actually more useful to them. And that's true. In some contexts it may be, right? The fox might be a distraction. You start thinking about, like somebody said, what does the fox say? You start thinking about, I'm going to leave this and go take a walk or whatever. Why are there flowers there? Is the fox allergic to the flowers? You know, it could be a distraction. But for most of us, the fox yawning actually helps keep our attention on what the speaker is saying. And this brings up something that's very important when doing presentations, whether online or in person, is when you've got somebody reading, they're not listening. Right? If you ask someone to read, you are asking them to stop listening to you. So if you've got something important that you're trying to say and you've got lots of text on the screen, you're actually setting them up to not hear what you have to say to them. I've heard a lot of people suggest that you shouldn't use slides at all because of this. There is one presenter, and I cannot remember his name, but he got tired of people looking down all the time. So he uses the slides to keep people very focused on exactly what he's saying. So his slides change like almost multiple times a second, highlighting different words as he says them, mainly because he was talking to engineers and he discovered if he kept changing things on the screen, they'd keep looking at him. But he's using it to focus the attention on the words, not give people something to read that's different than what he's saying. Okay, another problem. You've got great content, but no impact. So here's a question for you. How would you measure the success of a presentation? So you're giving a presentation. How would you measure the success of that presentation? Okay, so the suggestion of always start by lying to the audience and then walk it back, and they'll pay really close attention to make sure they're not fooled again. I'm not sure how effective that is, or actually I'm not sure if I'd be willing to try it, but that's an interesting idea. Okay. Based on the amount of questions being asked, audience engagement, feedback from attendance, Q&A at the end, how memorable it is, it being interactive, by what I learned, like with the person listening to what they learned. So these are all great things. Request for a copy, yes. Although some people may be requesting for a copy of your talk because they missed it, didn't understand what you were saying. Created ideas, verbal alignments. Slido link again. Yes, I will do that. There you go. Okay, everybody's got it? Okay. So these are all great things. People walking away having learned something. And the idea of people having learned something is generally what I think of. But I want to suggest that your goal is actually something maybe a little bit different. Because you can walk away from something and having learned a lot about it, but not actually take action. And usually if you're making a presentation, your goal is to get some type of action. It's not just to educate in a sense of, hey, we know something new, but there's nothing to do about it. So for most presentations, what we're trying to do is actually get them to take action. And oftentimes we focus so much on what is conveyed that we miss out on what is remembered. What is remembered is a lot closer to what's going to cause people to take action. But between these two things, we ought to be focusing on what people are going to remember more than what we say. If I can stand up here and just say gibberish and people remember important things that are helpful for them to take action, then I should stand up here and say gibberish, right? What we convey is only important to the extent that it helps with what is remembered, which is really only important in terms of how it helps us determine what is done. What do people do with the information afterwards? What are they going to, if we're trying to convince them that this is the way they should, here's the piece of software we should develop next, or this is a way experiment we should try in trying to create software for our customers, what we're actually willing to do is what really matters. I like the idea of candy. That can be good. It can also be a distraction. I was sitting in a classroom last week, and they were eating some snacks, and one kid in this classroom had the noisiest candy. Like every single snack he pulled out had the noisiest wrapper, to the point that I think he actually picked his snacks based on what had the loudest wrapper. So can be a distraction too. Okay, so what is conveyed? This can be important, but that's not the focus. What we really want to focus on is what is remembered, and then what is done is the thing that we're really going for. What is the action that people will take? And some of the things to make sure that things are remembered and to inspire actions, metaphors and analogies. These are ways of making sure that our talks help get action. Here's an example from one of my talks where I compare trying to predict how long it will take to read through books to how we can predict or forecast how long it's going to take to build a piece of software. And the thing about using metaphors and analogies like this is there's things that are really obvious when we think about trying to read through books that are very easy to miss when we're thinking of developing software. Another way to make sure that things are remembered in a way that hopefully will prompt action is outrageous examples. So let's say we want to show how complex behavior can be representing with a BDD scenario. So we could detail an elaborate account management project, or we could say, hey, let's define the behavior of this gross wasp that creates zombie, or whatever we want to call the crickets. We're gonna detail how that works using BDD. People remember this, right? This sticks with people's minds because it's an outrageous example, but it does show what we're trying to do, and it's in a way that people remember. Another example. So this is from one of my talks talking about how we try to forecast stuff. How far do you need to see what's ahead? Actually, from about roadmaps. Do you need to know about a deer that's 100 miles away? And then I bring up and say, well, if you're too focused on what's way ahead, you might miss the giant chicken that's right in front of you. Now, this was probably inspired by two things in my mind. Can't remember what it represented. Okay, so maybe I need to work harder on that particular one, right? It's all about what we remember. This particular example, though, came from, yes, this is to scale, right? We got the giant chicken in the road, but we're so focused on the little deer way over here, 100 miles down the road. Well, the 100 miles isn't to scale then. But the point is, this is a visual that stuck with people, and when they were thinking about what should I be focused on, am I missing something that's really close to me? Giant chicken, because I'm focused on things that are so far out in the future that I may never actually run into them. Now, for me, this was probably inspired partially because I had readily available a chicken silhouette in Apple Keynote that I was using to make this, and also by a childhood watching of the Hoboken chicken emergency. I'm just curious, how many of you guys have seen the Hoboken chicken emergency? Can you give me a thumbs up if you have, thumbs down if you haven't? Is this something that's in common? No one has seen it. Okay. It's about this giant chicken that this kid has as a pet, and the chicken kind of goes crazy and runs around Hoboken and steals people's potatoes. Yes, there may be a children's book about it. Anyway, an interesting thing, and no one has seen it. Okay, well this is great. Anyway, that was my inspiration for this particular one. And there's also failures, right? Some of the things we try to make good examples of don't land with people. Like Astrid was saying, she remembers the wasp, and probably that it was disturbing. She was thinking about the wasp, but she forgot what it actually represented, the BDD scenario of the wasp and how it stalks its nest. But bring them back around. Your goal is action. It doesn't matter what information is conveyed. It matters what is remembered and what change comes from it. And if we start thinking of how we handle our presentations based on the action that we get, which means we need to have a good way of presenting things, we need people to remember things, but the goal is the action, that can kind of flip around that can greatly influence the way that we give our presentations toward what actually matters to us. Okay, another problem. People don't understand the importance. So you can be in a situation where you're giving a talk and people may be tuning out because it doesn't seem important to them. Kind of like the deer way down the road. You know, it's not something that's important to us right now. Or you're giving really, really good information, but it doesn't tie to something that's actually painful to them. There's an online learning platform, and one of the big things they talk about is that if you're trying to teach people something, if you give them something that's a painkiller that solves some pain they have today, you'll probably get a lot more interest in it than if you give them a vitamin that solves something that they don't see as a problem today and is only further down the road. So I think that's a good way to think of it is, do people understand the importance of how what you're telling them is important today or in the near future? So what you're probably trying to do is, your talk may take a shape like this. Like, here's despair over here. Like, here's how things are going bad, but here's hope. We can do this. And here's more despair. Things aren't going well. We're not meeting our sales goal, but there's hope if we try to do this. And here's this, and kind of this back and forth to where you're taking people on this, not necessarily emotional roller coaster, but you're giving a problem and a solution, a problem and a solution. So when you're presenting your solution, people remember it and pay attention because you've just talked to them about the pain they're experiencing now. Problem, solution, or today's difficulties, tomorrow's potential. Today's difficulties, tomorrow's potential. And taking them on that journey so everybody understands exactly why things are important. Like documentaries. Yes, that's exactly. They do things like that to make it very relevant so people understand it. Here's an example of one of the things that I found effective is using polls. So here's one. This is just a screenshot. You're not voting on this one. What's the most common thing you see people use as a measurement of progress other than working software? And then people have to think through it. They have to kind of struggle with it. And then we talk about solutions to that. How do we get people to value actual working software? But by getting people to choose from these things, they have to interact with their problem space in a way that helps, you know, go down here. Here's the stuff that we're seeing that we need to change. And okay, here's a way to change it. So that's a very effective way to keep people engaged and see the value of what you're trying to present, is make sure that when you're presenting a solution to something, you have not too far in the past given them the problem in a way that's very easy to see and understand. Okay, so those were problems you can run into with talks. Now we're going to look at 4 visual problems, or things that I've run into with giving, particularly remote, but a lot of these are true for in-person as well. So one problem, your talk really needs to be drawn on a whiteboard. So this is something that happens sometimes. You're in a situation where really what you need to be is working on a whiteboard, but you're remote and you don't have a whiteboard. You don't have really fancy stuff to do it. Now, there are digital whiteboards out there. I find the value of digital whiteboards are mainly if everyone has a good drawing tool. If you're trying to collaborate around a whiteboard and everybody's trying to draw on their little trackpad, that's really hard. It's painful and it doesn't work very well. Now there's Miro and some tools like that can do some awesome things as well. Not necessarily, well, you can draw with them if you've got the right tool. What I found has worked well for me is just using a glass blackboard. And the reason I didn't use a whiteboard is because when I was using a whiteboard, since having just something huge white facing at the camera, is it made everything else really, really dark because it thought it was trying to opt. And I probably could have messed with the camera, but the blackboard looked pretty good. And then neon liquid chalk. Now, this isn't good for collaborating, but this is a good way if I've got a talk that requires writing a lot of stuff, if that's the best way to communicate, if that's the best way to inspire action, this is what I use, is something like this. And this is just a big sheet of black glass that I've got hooked to my wall. And then I've got some lights around it. Now, it's very reflective. Polarizing filters can help a lot with kind of cutting down on it, but you can see some of the reflection there. You've got kind of got to adjust stuff to where it works well. I think there are some glass blackboards that are made not to reflect as much light. I don't have one of those. These were interesting getting shipped from Amazon. I think I got 3 of them before one came without being broken. So it was kind of fun. Okay, so then the way I get the lighting is I have these black lights, so meant for parties and stuff like that, I guess. But I've got on the side 32 watts on either side, and then 27 watts on each of those things across the top. So it gives it, I can get a lot of black lighting on it, and it gives it a nice glow while still making it to where I don't look really dark in the picture. So that's one thing that's worked pretty well for me. Okay, so moving on, question for you. On Mark's first remote project, he was told he looked like Data, Tom Cruise, Jabba the Hutt, Chewbacca, Cary Grant, a Time Lord, or Dick Clark. Which do you think? I'm feeling pretty good about this Tom Cruise one, though I'm not sure that's a fair comparison. So Dick Clark, okay. While you guys are going that, I'm going to add this link here one more time. Okay, so the actual answer, I did get told, not that I look like Dick Clark, but one time I was told when somebody found out how old I was, they said, oh, Mark's the Dick Clark of software development, because he thought I was a lot younger than I actually was. But actually the one that here early on in the first remote project I was working on, I was told I looked like Data because my skin color looks something like this on the video. So the problem is you look like Data from Star Trek. So, very washed out and stuff, works fine if you're an Android, but if you're up on the screen with all your coworkers and stuff and they all look normal and you look like this, it does stand out. Matter of fact, for me, it stood out so much that when the person that was running the video conference system joined in, he looked at all of us and then changed the name. So my name showed up as Mark Pinkman Shed, and he left it up like that for about a month. So whenever I logged in, it said Mark Pinkman Shed. This gentle... This teasing inspired me to research what I needed to do in terms of lighting. And I tried a few things and eventually ended up with something like this from Amazon. These are LED lights. As a matter of fact, there's one of these right here to my side. But they're balanced for daylight, to give you daylight colored lighting. They're not particularly expensive. There's lots of things out there that will do this, but if you are giving remote talks, it's probably worth investing in some type of light to make sure that your skin looks normal and you don't look like you're, an Android with fake skin. Yes, playing with camera settings too. If you can adjust the white balance, those are all things to fiddle with that you can get your skin color looking normal. But you can look at other people on the screen. If you look particularly washed out, that's probably a good indication it's worth maybe investing in a better light, in a better different camera, or just in figuring out what the settings are on your camera. This is, I think, after COVID, a lot of the software people use adjust for these things automatically, but still having decent lighting. A lot of offices are a lot darker than we realize, and having a good light that's lighting things up. I've got a light like this over my desk that kind of shines down. It lights my face, but also lights my workspace so I can see things. As I've gotten older, I've discovered I need glasses, but I also need more light. Okay, another problem. The talking head can't interact with the content. So I see a question, how do you read the comments from a distance? I'll show you in a minute kind of what my setup is, and WebEx just changed it, so the device I'm using actually shows your comments on the screen now, where I'm seeing my self view. But I'll show you that in just a second. Problem, talking head can't interact with the content. So this is a green screen, and while you can't see it right now, that's actually what's right here behind me, is this green screen. Actually, I don't know if I have a way to turn that off so you can see it. That turns me off. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so here's what I look like. Well, that's kind of weird, but here's the green screen that's actually behind me in my books and some lights and stuff like that. So that's what's actually behind me here. I don't have a giant TV, although I've thought about using an excuse to get a giant TV. So that's what's going on back there. The green screen lets me actually work with stuff. Like I can point out things. Can't go too far off here because it eventually cuts my arm off. It's like a magic trick thing, right? But that's this is a way to make it so you can actually interact and work with work with your content, is having some type of green screen. This particular one pulls up from the ground. It works pretty well. I had another one that I just hung over some stuff before. I like this one because I can get it out of the way. There's also ones that pull from up above. And you can even get small ones that just kind of cover the back of your chair as well. But it's not enough just to have this. You also need some way of compositing things. We can always use two marks. Okay, I'm not sure if I'd like another mark, but cool. Appreciate that. Compositing software. So that's what lets me actually be on the green screen and put different things together. Early on, I was using Open Broadcaster software, and the reason I want to mention it here is because this is actually free. You can download this and use this on your device. You may be in a situation where you're not allowed to put this on your work laptop, but I'm going to show you in a minute how you can get it running like on your personal laptop and then share it through to work in some cases. So here's an example of what that software looks like. So this is kind of putting lots of things together. I've got two cameras here. There's one here, and I put them both up on the screen, and then I put something from the computer. This was just to show how you can put multiple things and the controls down there at the bottom. One of the cool things it does, though, is if you do have access to put whatever you need to on your computer, it lets you, yes, thanks for sharing that, John. It lets you actually share out, instead of just sending to a video output, you can share it as a virtual USB camera. So all this stuff that we put together here, we can then just say, okay, I'm in a video conference. I'm going to share, I want to share what the OBS software is doing, but I wanted to share it as if it's a webcam. So if you can share something from a webcam, you can share it from this. And that's a really easy way to run multiple things on the computer, so you don't have to have multiple computers and stuff running. You can also share it out as an HDMI, whatever output your laptop has, and I'll show you how that might be useful in a minute. Another problem, talk needs good visuals. So slide software, and this was a question I was wanting to see what people thought. What's your preferred presentation software? And this is, I'm genuinely curious what people like the most. I've used most of these. So we got PowerPoint, a lot of people have that. If you've got Office, I really like using Keynote for a lot of my stuff, but there's some reasons I'm starting to switch away from it. Something else random, okay, I'm curious what, if you had something else, I'd love to see what it, Mural, okay, cool. Those are cool. I've seen some really cool presentations like that. Prezi, I've done some cool stuff with it. Walks you, you kind of fly around and things, and that's cool. And then Google Slides, and I see it doesn't look like anyone's voted for Harvard Graphics. I just put that up to show how old I am because I actually had a copy of it. I don't know if I ever used it, but I had a copy at one point. Harvard Graphics was back in the day when it was running on DOS, and you would actually make a file and send it to a company that would make you slides, like actual slides that you would put in a slide projector and stuff. Oh, LibreOffice, yes, presentation. Those are good. Miro doesn't animate. And Google Slides is free. And I'm actually using Google Slides for this, mainly because Slido integrates really well with it. So here's some of those. This is Keynote. That's what I've used for most of mine. As a matter of fact, that image of the USS Enterprise was actually drawn in Keynote, which is one thing I like about Keynote is it's pretty easy to draw, even fairly complex things in it. This over here is actually using Mentimeter. It's not super powerful for layout and things, but you can do decent presentations in it. The big thing I've noticed with it, you can import stuff from Keynote into this, but it limits you at 100 slides, and lots of my presentations go beyond that, so that's been a little bit of a pain when I've tried to import stuff. This is Prezi. I don't know if you remember that talk, but you kind of fly around through the different things, and that's kind of fun. And then this one right here is Google Slides. Google Slides is nice and free, and you can do some cool things with it. I do find that if you're trying to do, like, doing a drawing like that in Google Slides probably wouldn't work very well. It'd be better to do it in something else and import it in. And for having decent slides, here's a couple things you might want to look at. These are two places you can get, like that picture of a fox was from unsplash.com. So these are royalty-free places you can get pictures. I use a lot of these for things. Digital Juice is one that's not royalty-free, but it's more of like Netflix for digital assets. I don't know if they still do it. They used to have a plan that was like $300, and it gives you a lifetime access to all of their images, pictures, backgrounds, and stuff like that. So these are all things that I use for backgrounds to try to make things interesting when I'm looking for a picture of a bored fox or something like that. Why ever draw when you can import pictures from the web? Usually I try to make sure that if my pictures aren't referencing, like if I've got a picture from Seinfeld, I'm not going to draw a picture of George, but I'll usually try to get pictures that don't have copyright associated with them. There's exceptions if I'm trying to show something specifically. So the Enterprise, I wasn't sure exactly how that worked, so I figured if I drew my own picture, I could do it. So trade-offs with everything, right? Okay. Problems making remote feel in person. And I have tried AI generated images. There was one here a while back that the talk was computer generated about Ledgerwood's talk on retrospectives we did. So I've tried a few. It usually takes a lot more effort than I think it's worth usually, but it may be getting better. Okay, so problems making remote feel in person. Okay, so here's the problem. Speaker looks like they're avoiding eye contact. So if you're talking to somebody and they're always looking down like here, won't look you in the eye, you know, kind of like your dog when the dog knows it did something wrong and won't look you in the eye. You don't want to have that type of feel as a speaker. So some of the ways to help minimize that are, one, look at the camera. And I'm not always really good at this because I've got chat over here. I've got a lot of stuff going on, but I try to keep looking right at the camera so we're making eye contact. But also putting the camera somewhere you're likely to look is good. So this is a setup I had for a while, which was just a camcorder with an HDMI output, and I took this octopus type tripod and bent it around to where the camera was as low to where I was looking at the screen as possible. You'll also find things that let you put the camera in the middle of the screen. It needs to be a small camera. This would kind of be distracting. So this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what I'm looking at here. Yeah, the GorillaPod, that's right. This is an older version of what I'm looking at here, except the green screen's behind me, not behind it. But I have a camera up here at the top, and then I've actually got another monitor right here that I look at for a lot of things, and that monitor over there is kind of my reference monitor that shows my different inputs. So I'm trying to look mostly at the camera. It's not perfect. I've got some things. I use two googly eyes around the actual camera to help me look at it. That's great. I'm going to have to try that. And I've got googly eyes right over there. I like putting them on in the middle of meetings, like you're in a meeting with a bunch of people and you put on the googly eyes and just see how long it takes people to notice. It's great. Okay, another problem, poor quality video. So this gets really annoying to look at. Now, if you have to choose between good video or good sound, go for good sound. But this is from one of the cameras I had, and it just looked awful. It's worth investing in trying to figure out how to up your the quality of your video. A lot of things for many years you'd only hit like 240 or 360 pixels. See, is that up to, yeah, that's the up and down. Now it's pretty common you can do 720 and you can do 1080. If you have the connection for it, generally the higher you feed, the better it is going to look to people. You can also adjust things by not making, if you don't have a very high quality camera and you are doing some type of compositing, don't make yourself too big, because if you stretch too much, then you end up with the pixelation and stuff. Okay, let's talk about cameras here just a minute. So now we're getting into technical stuff. You're watching this on an iPhone and there's lag on the video, but the audio is clear. Okay, so I've got to tell you a story here. WebEx generally is pretty good about that, and I imagine what it's doing is it's saying, hey, if I have to choose between one or the other, I'm going to make sure that we get the audio all the way through, and we'll deprioritize the video a little bit, which is probably a very sane thing to do. On faster connections, WebEx usually is pretty in sync from what I've seen and looks pretty good. I have some friends from college that we get together every other week, and we do a little online prayer meeting. We've been doing this for years. So these are people I've known since like 1994. And the other day we were doing that, and one of my friends had a very bad connection. Now his audio was just fine. We could hear him. Well, I'm sorry. That wasn't the case. His video looked fine. We could see him pretty well most of the time, and he could see us in real time. He could also hear us in real time. But his audio back to us was delayed by, I think we decided it was 25 seconds. And I hadn't realized this before. But kind of our cadence is we'd go around kind of talk about what we've got going on, what we'd like the group to pray for. And there was usually somebody would say something funny when it was their turn to talk. They'd usually say something funny that was going on, and then say something pretty serious that was going on in their life. Well, that gap was also a gap of right at about 25 seconds. So for my friend there, he would hear somebody say something funny and laugh at it. And then 25 seconds later, when they were talking about something very, sometimes gut-wrenching or very, very important to them, his booming voice would come through laughing at the most inopportune time because of that delay. And anyway, the point of that was that getting the audio right, usually if you have to prioritize one, get the audio right, because the delays on the audio can be much worse than the delays in the video. Anyway, side conversation that something just happened recently, but it was very, it came across as so inappropriate, the things that he was actually laughing at. Okay, on to cameras. These are some of the cameras I've tried for various things. This camera right here, if I'm not doing a green screen, that's what I've got. It's a VTC device. It interfaces with WebEx. It also can call into most systems where people have video conferencing systems, like a lot of banks have. If you buy one of those, I think they're like $12,000 to $15,000, but eBay, when people pull them out, switch to other things, eBay has them for very, very inexpensive, like just a fraction, a tenth or even less of that when people are just liquidating them. What I'm using, so these are a couple things. There's the camcorder I tried using. This is one that just a Cisco branded webcam that works pretty well. This was one thing I've had. So this is I guess I can't point out. That Nikon is a DSLR. And I had pretty good luck with it. But one of the things I discovered about the DSLRs is a lot of them can't keep the mirror up indefinitely for doing video. In this particular one, you couldn't just lock it up. So it would run for, I think, like 20 minutes, and then the mirror would come back down. So it wasn't really great for doing online talks, particularly if you're going to be talking more than 20 minutes. The Sony there, though, I think it's an A6400, is what I'm using now. I've been very happy with it. It doesn't have a mirror, and it's worked really well for what we need to do. So those are some of the cameras we've used. You can obviously use a camera built into your laptop, but if you can get something external, oftentimes you'll get a lot better quality out of it. Okay, problem, no feedback or interactions with remote participants. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. Somebody was saying you just feel like you're speaking into the void. Video and audio, making sure that you can talk if you need to, that's a great thing. The chat is great. I've had, like I mentioned, I've got chat up here in front of me next to the camera, so like I'm reading the chat right now. I can't always keep up with it, but that's how I try to make sure that I can see what's going on. WebEx actually just changed it, and it's showing up on the screen in front of me too. It's not there very long, but that's a nice thing that I've been hoping to do for a long time. Okay, so the other way that works really well for if you're trying to get interaction are polling tools like we're using here. This is Poll Everywhere. I've used it extensively because it has a way of embedding in Apple Keynote. But here's Mentimeter is another one. I really like their visualizations, particularly this thing right here where it takes two axes and shows things on them. And it looks really nice and it's nice graphics. More recently, though, I've started using Slido. That's what we're using here today. And the thing I really like about, the two things I really like about Slido is, one, it does still integrate with Google Slides. I wish it integrated with Keynote, but it integrates very nicely with Google Slides, and you can create the slides from inside of Google. You can create the polls from inside of Google Slides, which is really nice because it kind of keeps your flow and your thoughts going on as you're working on stuff. The other thing really nice about it is it comes with the WebEx license. So if you happen to have WebEx or something, depending on how your organization is licensed, you get a Slido license, so you don't have to buy something separate. So that's worked out well. But I did have a question. I wanted to see, which polling tool do you prefer for the Agile Lunch and Learns? What's been the ones that kind of stood out to you as being like, so Slido like this one, the Poll Everywhere, if you remember what they are, the Mentimeter, or you'd rather mail in a postcard to poll things? Slido, okay. So one of the things I've seen with Slido is it integrates in the, yes, and that's one thing that's been nice. And I think it even integrates on mobile, which is also nice because that's where it gets really hard to do the slide stuff, is trying to jump them back and forth. Anyway, okay, good. Well, I'm glad that's working well for people. And some people like the Poll Everywhere and Mentimeter right now. This one, okay, cool. It's good to know. Okay, next problem. The complex setup ruins the flow of an in-person talk. Let's see. The availability of inline polls too makes it confusing. Okay, I'm gonna check into that. I haven't gotten to see what it's like on your side of things very much. So I'll have to look at that one. Okay, so complexity ruins the flow of a talk. So this is something that's really easy to have happen, is you put so much in, you have so much complexity that you're trying to do that it ruins the flow, or things go wrong. All kinds of things can happen. This is why I try to evolve my setup piece by piece, and every once in a while you'll see me try something and like, well, that didn't work. We're going to try something else. Because if I try to do everything at once, there's too many moving parts. And that's where the polling tools can really either make or break you. The more the polling tools are integrated, like with Mentimeter, if I'm presenting from something else and using Mentimeter, I have to give myself a slide saying, oh, here's where you want us to show a poll, and then I've got to do a keyboard shortcut or something to switch over to show that and then come back. Whereas with what I'm doing with Slido and the way that Poll Everywhere works, it's actually embedded in the slide, and I just have to walk through the slide. So that really makes a big difference in what the flow is. So if you're looking for a polling tool, I would try to get something that you can integrate with your slide program, whatever that happens to be. And Slido, I think, integrates with PowerPoint if you're on a PC, I think is what it is. And there's lots of places where things do work and don't work, but that's something to really look for, is make sure that you can keep your flow going. This is another thing. I'm not using this right now, but this is a Stream Deck. It's used for a lot of people that are doing gaming, streaming, and stuff like that. I found with, and these are two things, if you're looking at something like that, be sure to look up BitFocus Companion and Vicerio, maybe pronouncing it wrong. Those are two programs that I found would let me use this Stream Deck and control multiple computers. So I could control one computer to advance through the slides and another computer to switch between cameras and different things like that. Now, once again, this is one of the things where the complexity of it, I finally found I could do everything I needed by simplifying some other parts of my setup. But this is a really good way, and it works with OBS, so you can switch back and forth between things in OBS as well. Okay, technical problems. Okay, imagine you're going before a judge online, but your video is showing you as a cat. What do? You stop until you can fix the problem, request a delay while you find a 13-year-old to help you, or ask to proceed anyway. Now, this is not a hypothetical situation. Ask to proceed anyway, and I'm guessing probably most of you have seen this, but I'll throw it in here anyway. Stop until you fix the problem. Okay, and so most of you are voting for exactly what this lawyer did over here. Say I'm not a cat. That's right. Okay. And I didn't put the video up here, but there's a judge on here, and these are the lawyers getting ready to work on a case, and one of the lawyers shows up as a cat. And the judge is like, I think you've got a filter on. And he's like, yes, I can't figure out how to turn it off. I'm not a cat, but I'm ready to proceed. I'm not a cat, Judge. Trying to go ahead and proceed. I don't know what they ended up doing with it, but it's a really funny clip. If you want to look for it, look up "I am not a cat," judge, lawyer, some words like that. What I think is interesting about this particular video is this thing right up here. Recording of this hearing or live stream is prohibited. Violation may constitute contempt of court and result in a fine of up to $500 and a jail term up to 180 days. I'm not sure how this video, if it got out through some other channel, but I'm so glad that it did get shared with the world, whatever made that happen. Okay, so technical problems. What you want to show is not where you want to show it. I will cover a few things here. Just mentioning encoders. So these are encoders. This lets you feed in an HDMI and go to USB. This up here does the same thing. The reason that these can be useful is you can do things like use a higher quality camera. You can also present on the video channel instead of the presentation channel, which sometimes can be handy. And you can do composite on the video channel. So you can set up something like this. So here's an example of setup I've used before. When I have a machine from the client that's on the VPN, I'm not allowed to install any software on it. And there's only certain things I can plug into it. And one of those is a USB webcam. Well, the encoder functions as a USB webcam, and so I can take my personal laptop, or my company laptop, do whatever I need to do on that, put all kinds of crazy compositing software and things on it, and then share it through to them without kind of passing that barrier of this is their network, their computer, and I can't install any software on it. So this is one way. If you're at a place that maybe doesn't let you add things to the computers, but you are allowed to bring your own webcam, an encoder lets you use your laptop or whatever else you have as a webcam, and that can be an effective way to share stuff. Or you can also share a camera. If you've got a camera that you want to use that's higher quality, but doesn't necessarily have a USB output. So here's an example of kind of how that looked with this is the thing. This is the setup that I use if I'm presenting to people, like if they're bringing me in to give a talk to their company, but I've got to use their version of Teams or something like that, or if I was using their computer. So I can have my HDMI, my camera, my presentation laptop, those go through encoders. The compositing software, whatever I use composite, goes to another encoder and then gets shared with them by USB. I'm using something kind of like that in this setup. I'm just sharing with the WebEx codec that's sitting on top of my monitor here. I'll go through these kind of fast because they're probably not super interesting. It's also possible to share from the compositing computer with a virtual USB port, like I showed you earlier. But this is the thing I wanted to show you right here. This particular device, if you're doing a lot of this Blackmagic ATEM Mini does a lot of this stuff for you. So like we were looking at this huge setup right here, it replaces all of that stuff in blue because it has multiple HDMI inputs and also has outputs of HDMI and outputs of USB. So if you are getting into this and doing something, check these out because they're pretty inexpensive for everything that they do. A lot of churches use these, and a lot of video bloggers and people doing different types of things. So it's very, very handy. And that's what's actually handling my green screen and different things like that. And can do a lot of other things too. Okay, video conferencing or webinar software. So here's some of the things that I've mentioned: WebEx meetings, Microsoft Teams. There's other kind of conferencing solutions. I've spoken at conferences where they had like something I'd never seen before, where you like run around and talk to different people and then they put you up on stage. But all these things, if I have the ability to share as a USB camera, I can use whatever setup I'm using. But I did want to ask, what is your preferred meeting application from what you used? There's WebEx, which is what we're using here. Lots of people really like Microsoft Teams. I've had good success with that. Some people really like Zoom. Google Meet, I really liked for a while. It works, and my kids use it for a lot of stuff with their friends and classmates. And the Facebook Workplace I know is out there, but I haven't ever run into a situation where somebody was using it. Same with the Amazon Chime. Okay, looks like Microsoft Teams has really taken over and done a lot. The Zoom, I probably would have gone with Zoom for stuff. The thing I like about WebEx is I can call into it using any type of standard video conferencing hardware. And Zoom, you've got to like add more licenses, at least as far as I can tell, to get that to work. I think Teams may be similar in that regard, but if everybody's using Teams, it works well. It's really difficult to use OBS with Teams. Okay, that's interesting. Well, and that might be a case where if you have another computer running OBS and then just an encoder that you feed into, like that little encoder, I think is like $20 off Amazon. They're very, very inexpensive to do. I think it does HD from HDMI to USB. Okay, so the overall setup, I showed you a little bit of it. This is fairly similar. I've added the TV since here, or I moved that TV down at the bottom up to the top. This is kind of what my setup is looking like, is something like this now. Now, I did not start with that. This is fairly complicated. It's grown a lot over time. I've got the Cisco VTC thing there that is what's using my mics, what the audio is feeding through. The camera on it right now I'm not using because I'm using the camera that's up above it. Next week when we do the robots demo, I'll actually be using that camera and then using a document camera. So this is the setup. The difference I have is I've got the ATEM Mini sitting in front of it now. So here's kind of the layout of, I've got my presentation laptop, the camera. Those are going through the encoders, which is the ATEM Mini, into the compositing, which is also the ATEM Mini, to the WebEx codec, and then I can see the video conference, so I can see the people. If you've got your camera on, you show up at the top, and then see my presentation in the other monitor. So this is what I'm using. I'm not trying to encourage people to go out and do something like this, but there is a lot that this has grown over time of adding pieces, and I've probably thrown out about as much as I've added. A side note, speech being delayed by video. Okay, that's interesting. I will do some testing on that. It may have something to do with the fact of using an external camera, and the algorithms that try to match those things up may not understand it as well, or it may just be that between me and you there is something that's slowing it down. Okay, no delay for other people. Okay, cool. So one other thing that I wanted to talk about is, how do you fail? Right? Some of these things, if you're trying to do lots of remote presentations, you're going to have things go wrong. There was one case, some of you may remember it, where I accidentally left this camera on. And so there was a view of me from the waist down like this with the green screen and my fuzzy slippers. I'm not sure if these were the fuzzy slippers I was wearing. I have these slippers. My wife got them for me for my birthday, and they're very comfortable, but our dog thinks they're a chew toy, so I don't get to wear them very much. Anyway, you had this view of me from the waist down with my fuzzy slippers, and I think I had a bunch of boots and old shoes because I was set up by the door where we kind of use as a mud room. And somebody at the very end of it said, "Oh, it's like, we're not sure what was going on, but there was this view of you from the waist down with your slippers and the green screen stuff. Did you mean to have that on?" So now I try to be more careful. Now, fortunately, that wasn't any type of catastrophic fail. And I'd encourage you to think about, if you're doing lots of presentations, think about how you can fail with grace. Here's an example of not failing with grace, which is where I had tested my firmware on my robots for last week's talk really, really well. And then they updated the firmware, and I was not, it was not working. So Lori said, "At least you were wearing pants." And yes, that, so this is an example of not failing with grace, but I want to ask you, what is your biggest fear of failure when presenting remotely? Your biggest fear of failure. We might have a fear that the internet will go off. Power, wasted time, not taken seriously, network dropping. Oh, your guys' fears are so much better than things I'm worried about. Demos not working. Yes, that's a big one for me. No one turning on cameras, technology not working, audio not working, forgetting to share my screen, or like me, forgetting and talking for a long time at the beginning with the audio off. Spinach in my teeth. Yes, being able to see yourself is very important to me. VPN die, messages not getting crossed. Dog barking like a lunatic. Yes. I actually had, it wasn't during a talk, but I had goats break into my office one time. And that was exciting. People seeming interested. Computer crashing. Yes, that is definitely a real problem. Teams kicking people out. Network issue. Not knowing if people have questions. Technology not working. Okay, so lots of things that could potentially go wrong. Some of these we may have no control over, right? On the other hand, there probably are things that we can try to find ways to fail gracefully. Here's a few examples of things. So having backup equipment. There's been a few times, hopefully, once you get the problems, they're not a fear anymore. There's been a few times, I don't know if you remember, where I've come up and the audio just didn't work for some reason. And so I switched to a different place. I've got another backup equipment somewhere else that I can run over to and present to if I have to. It doesn't look as cool as this and everything, but experience has shown me that having that makes it a lot more comfortable because I know I can jump to that if I need to. Degrade gracefully. If you've got something like if the video isn't working for some reason, if it's not keeping up, if my internet isn't keeping up with it, I can turn off my video and just go to showing this and that, showing the background, the slides, and that may give me away. It's degrading, but it may work better for people. Wearing pants. So kind of as a thing is make sure you don't set yourself up to where if something goes wrong, it's really, really embarrassing. And I'm not wearing shoes now, right? I've got slippers on now, so I'm not going to wear not wearing shoes, and I'll live with that and I'll own it. I've seen people set up their talks though to where like the background behind them is into the common part of their house where people are running back and forth wearing towels and stuff, and that's not degrading gracefully. You want to set it up to where that's not going to happen accidentally. Alternate paths through content. Making sure that if you end up going a little bit long, there's different ways to get through, and testing your presentation. So to wrap up, I do want to mention good talks are not about technology, but obtrusive technology can ruin a good talk. And then the other thing I want to leave you is, because this is really, really key, is when we're thinking of our talk, looking for ways to talk about what's difficult and then solutions, and what's difficult and solutions, which we've tried to do with this talk, is kind of take us on that journey back and forth. I hope some of these things are useful to you. I do not have a golf ball at the end. I should have. Mentioning this is next week. I think I've got it all worked out. I hope to see you guys there. Please pass on the invite. It'll be coming out here in a few hours to anyone that's might be interested in behavior-driven development. This is going to be a lot of fun to go through that. I usually do this in person, but I think I've got a good setup now to actually demo it. And last thing, I'd love to get your feedback. So if you can give feedback on what you thought of the talk, I think there's just two ratings and then a place for any suggestions on things. So thank you all for coming. Hope to see you next week. I'll get that invite out in just a little bit.